Thank you, Congresswoman, and it's great to see you as well. And so, Congresswoman Pingree, Ranking Member Joyce, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to provide testimony. My name is Kirk Francis. I serve as president of the United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. I am also proudly serving as chief of Penobscot Indian Nation in the great state of Maine. We are here today to both celebrate historic proposals in the president's budget and to request in the president's budget request, and to also once again remind you all that the federal government continues to fail to deliver upon us its obligations to tribal nations and Native people. This failure has persisted regardless of changes in administration or Congress. Despite numerous reports, investigations, recommendations, and consistent advocacy from Indian country, it's been evident in the 2003 Quiet Crisis Report, the 2018 Broken Promises Report, and the way COVID-19 has ravaged our nation's people and communities. Deep and chronic failures require bold, systematic changes. And I'm sorry, Congresswoman, am I not on camera?
No, you're not. It's a tribal symbol, not you.
So I just got a notice from your staff. Is that better?
It is. Technology is jinxed today, so we're just going to expect this to happen.
Deep and chronic failures require bold, systematic changes, some of which now have been proposed by the president. This is not a question about addressing poverty and needs across Indian country. Our relationship with the United States is ultimately about honor, fulfilling commitments and promises. The solutions we offer involve a fundamental shift in federal Indian policy and funding. They will allow Indian country to realize its great potential and create lasting positive change for tribal nations and our people. It is critical that the administration propose and Congress demand budgets containing full funding for all federal Indian agencies and programs. Given our history and unique relationship, this funding can no longer be subject to the instability of discretionary spending. We must achieve full and mandatory funding for all federal Indian agencies and programs. And the president's unprecedented request for IHS, though not entirely reflective of the tribal estimate for full funding, is an excellent start. The process under which OMB develops budgets and policy that impact us require reform also. We believe a strong tribal affairs office should be created at OMB. In concert with this office, OMB must be required to produce full, detailed accountings of the federal funding distributed to Indian country, including only what tribal nations access, not what funds are which we are technically eligible for. While we are appreciative of the inclusion of funding for tribal nations in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this level of funding is insufficient to address centuries of unmet infrastructure obligations. A much greater federal investment is necessary to rebuild tribal nation infrastructure and economies. Similar to the US investment in the rebuilding of post-World War II Europe via the Marshall Plan, the legislative and executive branches should commit to the same investment to rebuild tribal nations. As we await further details on the president's request for FY23, we celebrate the historic nature of the administration's proposal to move IHS and other funding to the mandatory side of the budget, as well as a plan to begin to close gaps in IHS funding. We are pleased to see the proposed $1.1 billion increase to programs within DOI Indian Affairs. However, we also note the historic and continued unmet funding obligation with regards to BIA's diverse line items. The recent Taloa report cites the full funding obligation of just public safety and justice lines at $3 billion. While we firmly believe all Indian country funding should be fully funded today, including the IHS, we recognize that the Biden administration has taken a positive step forward in its proposal to move us closer to that reality. We now call upon Congress and this subcommittee in particular to work with tribal nations and the administration to fulfill the government's responsibilities and to assure that these proposals are enacted. While each member of Congress shares equally in trust and treaty obligations, you have a unique understanding of these obligations, including unmet funding obligations, and more importantly, an opportunity to drive historic change. You know how the chronic underfunding of IHS has contributed to the lack of access to care, health disparities, and preventable death in Indian country. especially during the COVID crisis. We ask that you join us in supporting the administration's proposal for IHS, as well as CSC and 105L, and use this knowledge in conversations with colleagues. We know that it will take tribal leaders and advocates, the administration, and congressional appropriators working together to enact these. In closing, we implore you to lead the change within Congress that is necessary to improve how the United States views, honors, and fulfills its promises to Indian country. The federal budget is a reflection of this commitment. We recognize that there are many issues that this body considers. However, we ask that you always remember this nation's first promise to its first people, the promise that resulted in an exchange responsible for the vast wealth, power, and influence of this great country. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Francis. Next, we'll hear from Ms. Julie Kitka, the president of the Alaska Federation of Natives.